What's life for me? Like most kids, I grew up with screens. I wasn't an iPad baby, but that's because iPads weren't a thing when I was a baby. I came of age in a time before streaming services, so most of the movies I watched came in DVD format or, in some cases, VHS. It was the before time. Not only were they VHS tapes, but my parents didn't really like to buy movies. They would tape them off the TV. So a movie would come on HBO, my dad would put a blank tape in the VCR, fire it up, and just like that, we had another movie for the collection. A lot of the tapes on our shelf were from a time before I was born, and there were a lot of them I didn't recognize the names of. I would stand there and stare at the tapes and try to read my dad's illegible handwriting and see if I could figure out if there was something I wanted to watch among all that scribble. Did I want to watch Terms of Endearment? No. No, I did not. But there were a few movies tucked among all those Polaroid tapes that I actually enjoyed. The Last Unicorn, which my mom apparently liked so much that she wanted to keep it in the collection, and for me it became baby's first anime, sort of. It also made me draw a lot of unicorns, which thankfully none of that art has survived until now. Some art deserves to be destroyed. Monster Squad, which was genuinely terrifying to me for pretty much the entirety of my childhood, but I still watched the hell out of it anyway. It was worth the nightmares. And yes, there were nightmares. Ruskies, which, alright, stay with me here, stars the kid who played Ralphie in A Christmas Story as a military brat who lives on Key West, and he and his friends hide and protect a Russian sailor who washes up on shore. This movie came out like 2 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall, so the politics didn't even really matter at this point, but it taught me how to say take a hike in Russian, so it'll always have a special place in my heart. But the most important movie from my childhood is one that most people haven't even heard of. Wait, I take that back. I knew a girl in college who had also seen this movie, and when we both discovered that we knew about this movie, we quoted the dialogue back and forth with like the kind of energy you usually only see when hostages are reunited with their families. It was like we were speaking code. Nobody around us could figure out what we were saying, but that was okay. We knew what we were saying. We were members of a secret club, fans of one of the more obscure movies of the 1980s. The movie is called The Pirate Movie. That's the name of it. It's just called The Pirate Movie. It's a musical comedy. It's set in Australia, where I currently live. And despite some really ambitious marketing efforts for the time, it pretty much failed on every conceivable level. But by the time my grubby little hands were pulling the Pirate Movie VHS tape off our shelf and shoving it in the VCR, it already had a cult following that was growing, and it kept growing, and it's still growing today. In fact, today out in the wild, you'll sometimes meet a person who's not only heard of this movie, but also kind of loves it. I'm one of those people. So right now I want to take you on a little journey. Climb aboard my 3-masted sailing ship, grab a snifter of whatever it is you like to drink, and get ready for an adventure that almost no one has experienced before. Because by all accounts, it kinda sucked. But if you ask me, it was pretty awesome. To understand what the pirate movie is, you first have to understand the source material that it's trying to parody, improve on, maybe both, I'm not sure. Either way, the source material is a musical called The Pirates of Penzance. And the pirate movie has basically the same plot, with some notable changes. So what's The Pirates of Penzance? The Pirates of Penzance is a 2-act comedy opera about pirates, by W.S. Gilbert and Arthur Sullivan. It first hit the stage in 1879 in New York, and critics loved it. It was widely considered to be clever, funny, an elevation of Gilbert and Sullivan's work, and it's interesting to note that it was considered something of a parody itself, borrowing and gently mocking from composers like Verdi and Donizetti. The point is, it was popular and it had real staying power. People liked the singing and dancing pirates. Since its release, it's been performed and adapted on stage, TV, movies, over and over again for over 100 years. The very general plot of Pirates of Penzance, and therefore the plot of the pirate movie, is this. Our hero is Frederick, a 21-year-old orphan who's been apprenticed to some pirates for his whole life, And now that he's 21, he wants to leave the pirates and go explore the world and have a normal life. He leaves, goes ashore, meets the many, many daughters of Major General Stanley, and falls in love almost immediately with the youngest daughter, Mabel. She, of course, falls for him too, but the pirates show up and want to kidnap and marry her sisters. Marry. It was a different time, and it's a comedy. Stick with me. Frederick wants to fight them, but it turns out that his apprenticeship was until his 21st birthday, not his 21st year. For most people, that's the same thing, but Frederick's birthday is February 29th, Leap Day, which means he still owes the pirates 63 more years of birthdays in order to fulfill his contract as an apprentice. Yeah, it's a stretch. These things are always a stretch. Just stay with me. Frederick's got an overdeveloped sense of honor, so he agrees to go back and be a pirate again. Mabel is sad, but something happens that I'll talk about later that saves the day and gives the play a happy ending, yada yada, everybody's good. The ending is one of the big divergences between Pirates of Penzance and the pirate movie, but there are a lot of others. Let's take a little walk to see where else the pirate movie goes its own way. For starters, the framing device. The pirate movie starts and ends in the modern day, or what was the modern day in 1982. Mabel is now the focus character, and she's an exchange student to Australia, I think. The movie doesn't make this super clear, but people who worked on the movie have said in interviews that that's the story. She's an exchange student. So she and her many, many friends, exchange sisters, again, it's not super clear, they go to a seaside marina for a pirate festival. Most of the women are wearing bathing suits, but that's not Mabel's vibe, so we already know in movie language that she's different and special because she's wearing flannel in the summer in Australia. She's also relegated to supporting the other women, like she literally carries a boombox to provide the soundtrack for them while they walk and sink. So maybe they were the ones saying she couldn't wear a bathing suit, like Cinderella's stepsisters or something. It's not very clear. But honestly, it feels like her own choice to wear the flannel because she's awkward and quiet. Relatable. Mabel gets drawn into a sword fighting demonstration by a guy who she's clearly into. He invites her to come out on his boat later, but instead all of her friends, whom I will now call the backstabbing bitches, they get there first, they start up the boat, and they leave without Mabel. You might think, oh, why didn't he just turn the boat around and go back for her? These bitches literally hold him down so that he can't do that until they're out to sea. And I guess at that point he just gives up on going back for Mabel. Anyway, Mabel rents a sailboat, follows them out to sea, gets caught up in a storm, gets thrown off the sailboat, and washes up on some shore somewhere unconscious. This is where the pirate story starts because it's set up as a dream she's having while she's lying on this beach. The plot of the pirate story plays out with characters from the real-life framing device appearing as characters in her dream. The cute guy is Frederick, of course. The pirate king in this spectacular jeweled codpiece is the other guy that was helping with the sword fighting demonstration at the marina. We didn't really get to know him very much outside of a couple of lines at the start, but now he's the pirate king. Mabel appears in her own dream as the youngest daughter of Major General Stanley, and the backstabbing bitches are now all her sisters. Throughout the movie, Mabel seems both aware and unaware that she's dreaming. There are fourth wall breaks, funny asides, and some modern references that I think are there to serve to remind us that this isn't real. It's a farce, so just sit back and get comfortable because it's gonna get weird. After Frederick washes up on shore, he finds Mabel almost immediately and the two of them kiss. And this, for me, was the first time I'd ever seen a French kiss on screen. Like, this was the clearest tongue I'd ever witnessed. This kind of blew my mind as a kid, and it made it seem honestly more real to me. Like, this is how grown-ups actually kiss. It was certainly better than, like, the pecks you see in other movies, even if it was also kind of gross. Then the plot plays out with Frederick wanting to marry Mabel immediately, but their family has some weird tradition where the daughters have to get married in order of age, and Mabel's the youngest, so she's way down the list, and none of her sisters even has a boyfriend, let alone a husband.
What is she looking for?
Love?
Ha. Well, she'll have a long wait. She's the youngest, and by noble custom, the eldest must marry first, which makes me first.
Me second. And me third.
The Major General agrees to let Frederick marry Mabel early if he can recover the family treasure. To get the family treasure, they have to do this whole thing where they have to find the map to it, but the map only exists as a tattoo on the Pirate King's back for some reason. Yeah, the same Pirate King, but he never takes his shirt off, so they have to trick him into taking his shirt off. And then they get the map, and then they take a boat, and they go to what is the shallowest water you've ever seen to recover this big treasure chest full of gold and jewels. Throughout all this, the pirates are on their way, and they want the sisters, and they want the treasure, and everything else pirates are into. And of course, there's that thing about Frederick owing them 21 birthdays for his apprenticeship, not 21 years. That comes out in this one as well. In fact, it comes out during a sword fight in a library with the Pirate King, which is honestly one of the coolest scenes in the movie and also really Looney Tunes. Frederick tells Mabel that he has to go back and be a pirate. Again, Mabel's mad about it and tries to lead the local police. There's a really weird scene with a police inspector that I think is meant to be Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther movies. And then the pirates attack the house at night, which leads to a long and goofy fight scene. And when I say goofy, I mean like there's a pizza fight. They throw pizzas at each other. This is not a battle anyone can take remotely seriously. Frederick and Mabel face off against each other. There's some romantic music playing. She knees him in the crotch. He goes down hard. And then the Pirate King shows up and angrily screams that everybody needs to be executed. Like, this is the only point in the entire movie where things feel actually maybe perilous for a second. The screen even goes completely red when he does this.
Rip their lungs out! Feed them to the sharks, beginning with her!
No! This is where the ending completely deviates from the original. In Pirates of Penzance, Ruth shows up at this point and announces that all of the pirates are actually secret nobles who are loyal to Queen Victoria. And, like, somehow that makes it okay for them to marry all the daughters because long live the queen, I guess? So everyone is happy and forgiven and the play is over. That to me is pretty weak and a little dumb, like they were just trying to sprint to the end and wrap it up with a happy ending and that's what they could come up with. But in the movie, after the Pirate King announces everybody's execution, Mabel stops time with a literal freeze frame and says, "I want a happy ending."
Wait a minute! This is my dream. I want a happy ending. I want a happy ending!
This is also pretty dumb and clearly a shortcut to the end, but I don't mind it as much because the whole movie is like that. Everyone except the Pirate King cheers, and then we transition to the grand finale, which is this massive and terribly choreographed dance number in which all the pirates marry either the daughters or each other. This thing was allegedly rehearsed a lot. Frederick gives Mabel a ring, and then there's this fade out where we're back on the beach with real-time Mabel. She's still wearing flannel, and she's still unconscious. She wakes up, she remembers the pirate dream, and then she looks at her hand and goes, "What?" There's actually a ring there. There's a ring on her finger. This is never explained in any way. The hot guy immediately appears and picks her up. His name is not Frederick, by the way, but we never actually find out what his name is. And then he carries her off. So I guess we're meant to think that he found her there unconscious on the beach, and like instead of doing CPR or drying her off, he just slid a ring onto her lifeless finger and then waited for her to wake up. I don't know. Either way, they get married in the next scene, which has all this 80s gold lame cruise ship energy that I cannot explain. And the end of the movie anyway. Throughout the whole thing, there are songs because it's a musical. 5 of those songs are just lightly tweaked versions of the Pirates of Penzance songs, and another 7 are original to this movie. The music in this movie switches back and forth between those rollicking sea shanty type songs
and it is a glorious thing to be the Pirate King.
And the oozing ballads that were probably really popular in 1982.
How can I live without her? And she's all I'm living for.
As a kid, I learned every word to every song in the soundtrack, because of course I did. And I could still probably sing it for you right now, but I won't. Trust me, this is better for both of us. I also taught myself that terrible choreography from the finale, but I have yet to find anyone who will do it with me. Tone-wise, the pirate movie is pretty all over the place. It's clearly a comedy, but it doesn't seem to know what kind of comedy it wants to be. It's absurd, but it doesn't go hard into that dry absurdity of like a Monty Python. It leans hard into gags, but it also has a lot of thought-provoking moments. It's a parody of several other movies and shows, but some of the references fall flat and some just don't make sense in context. It's raunchy, but it's also rated PG, and you can kind of tell that this movie isn't making the jokes that it wanted to make because it wants to keep that family-friendly rating. So you get a lot of jokes that kids don't understand, jokes that the adults do understand but think are stupid, and a lot of tongue-in-cheek references to other culture, other media, and honestly, movies that are better than this one.
The Force, Frederick. Remember the Force.
That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we'll get to that later. For now, when you look at this finished product, you probably can't help but wonder, how did this thing get made? What were they thinking? Who greenlit this? By the late 1970s, the Pirates of Penzance had been floating around in various forms for over 100 years. Around this time, a theater producer named Joseph Papp put a Penzance revival on Broadway starring Linda Ronstadt. She was like a big American pop singer at the time, and it caught the attention of a music executive named David Joseph. David Joseph was pretty well known for managing different artists like David Bowie, and he'd already made an agreement with his buddy, an Australian actor named Ted Hamilton, to work on a project together. This is Ted Hamilton and his dimples. They put their heads together and decided to do a comedy movie adaptation of Pirates of Penzance, which probably felt like a slam dunk. I mean, pirates will never not be cool, and Penzance had shown itself to have really good staying power. So they approached 20th Century Fox for support. There were some negotiations that were described as delicate, but in the end, the studio was on board for distribution, as long as the lead actors were locked in, and the lead actors would be locked in as long as the script was good. So, the script. They hired an Adelaide writer named Trevor Farrant, who was a fairly seasoned comedy guy who'd worked on stuff like the Laugh-In revival and Shirley MacLaine's show. I don't really know much about these shows, but apparently they were funny enough for the time. You know, that 70s style humor. He was known for writing gag comedy. And that makes a lot of sense when you see how this movie turned out. He took the job, and he claims he wrote the entire script in 4 days. He also reportedly got paid $55,000, which at the time was the most any Australian screenwriter had ever made up to that point. The producers, Hamilton and Joseph, they loved the script. Hamilton said that it was superb, full of fun and vitality. Hamilton had also clearly done his homework about the source material because a reporter asked him how Gilbert and Sullivan would feel about him taking their Pirates of Penzance show and doing a parody of it, and he pointed out that Gilbert and Sullivan had basically done a parody of other shows with Pirates of Penzance. In fact, he thought they would approve of how the pirate movie turned out. I have doubts about that based on how it was received, but we'll get to that. So the script was approved and considered good, which means the lead actors were on board. Who were the lead actors? Christopher Atkins, who was a teen heartthrob in the 80s and was now about 20 years old, was picked to play Frederick. He was fresh off of making a movie called The Blue Lagoon with Brooke Shields, and that movie showed off his athleticism and his ability to do physical things, and that would come in handy for the pirate movie. Kristy McNichol was cast as Mabel. She was a 19-year-old Emmy-winning TV actress who was looking to make the move into film. Funnily enough, neither of these actors had seen Pirates of Penzance before this project, apparently, and so they watched it in preparation for the project and didn't care for it. Kristy McNichol apparently found it really boring. Also, apparently, Christopher Atkins was still under contract with another studio, Columbia Pictures, at the time of his casting, so they basically agreed to loan him to this movie and then take half of what he made. The actors did a lot to try and prepare for this film, so, that's good. It's good when actors actually put some effort into preparing. You want your cast to be invested in your project. McNichol took voice lessons to get ready for the singing parts, and Atkins apparently trained in everything. Singing, dancing, fencing, you name it. They really wanted that Tiger Beat idol clout behind this film. I'm not kidding about that. Here's a Tiger Beat from 1980 with his face right on it. So in doing this project, I discovered that Christopher Atkins is on Cameo, that website that lets you book a little video from celebrities and sports people and stuff like that. So I reached out to him. I thought doing it through Cameo would be a good idea because then I could like compensate him for his time, which I'm a big fan of doing. I asked him what the biggest challenge was in getting ready for the pirate movie, and he showed me a storyboard of the final scene, the big fight scene at the end. And he mentioned all the training, specifically the fencing.
A story to that was I had to take fencing, singing, and dancing for this movie. And so I was in Australia for about 6 months, fencing lessons, because we had the fencing. And the funny part about that was the Pirate King, he never showed up as much for the fencing lessons. So every time we were doing our choreography, I had welts all over me from him whacking going the wrong way when we're supposed to do the other choreography.
He was pretty hyped to talk about the movie, though.
I can't tell you, it absolutely blows my mind how much that movie was such a massive cult favorite with millions of people.
I just have to say, my little nerd self was so happy to be booking this cameo. Like, that's Frederick without a K. That's Frederick.
Frederick without a K?
Mabel, also without a K. God, we have so much in common!
I genuinely don't have words for how happy I was to see this guy chatting in this video. Anyway, production-wise, this movie was a pretty ambitious undertaking for the time. It was filmed and produced in Australia, but it wasn't set in Australia, which was not very common for Australian-made movies up to that point. Like, if you were making an Australian movie before this, you were probably setting it in Australia and telling a story about dingoes eating babies or something like that. But that wasn't the case here. Ted Hamilton said he wanted it to seem like the movie could be set anywhere, well, anywhere tropical. They chose Loch Ard Gorge in Victoria for the exterior beach settings, and it's a really pretty stretch of beach. It's gorgeous. It's named that because a ship called the Loch Ard went down there in a shipwreck in 1878. Just 1 year before Pirates of Penzance actually debuted in New York. All but 2 of the passengers and crew died in that wreck. There is a memorial there now and like a cemetery where a bunch of people are buried. But you know, that's probably not bad mojo for a movie about ships or anything. They decided to shoot the interior and exterior mansion scenes at a place called Werribee Park, also in Victoria. And it was also built in the 1870s. You can visit both of those places right now if you want to, and honestly, I kind of want to. I live in Australia, but I'm in Western Australia, so it's like the other side of the country. But it might be worth going over there. Tell you what, watch this video and then tell me in the comments if you think I should make the pilgrimage. Tell me if you think it's worth it. So, with all these cool locations and kind of well-known actors, what did the pirate movie cost to make? Reports kind of vary a bit on this. The most reliable sources I could find put the budget between 5 and 6 million American dollars, which would have been approximately the same in Australian dollars. The exchange rate in the summer of '82 was almost exactly 1-to-1. In today's money, that's a little more than 17 million US dollars. That probably doesn't sound like much, but we need to compare it to other movies made that same year, especially the ones that were very successful, and not to the over-the-top movie budgets that we have today. So let's see, what else came out that year? E.T., the highest grossing movie of 1982. That came out that year. E.T. had a budget of $10.5 million. An Officer and a Gentleman came out that year. That had a budget of $7.5 million. Tootsie, which was the second highest grossing film of the year, had a budget of $22 million, but even at that time, people thought that was nuts. Like, they made it back in spades, because of course they did, but at the time, $22 million was a lot to spend on a movie. And then there's Porky's, also that same year, that was made on a $4 million budget. So, budget-wise, the pirate movie was pretty much in the same wheelhouse as other movies being made in that time, but this was Australia, not Hollywood. For Australia, that budget was a lot. The Publicity, when this movie came out, said that this movie cost 9 million Australian dollars to produce, making it the most expensive Australian movie made up to that point. Again, that number is higher than the other numbers that I found, so they might be factoring publicity costs into that, which would be weird. You're not supposed to do that really, but like, it would explain why it's higher. And of course, other movies in the last 42 years have been a lot more expensive. At the time of this filming, I think the most expensive movie made in Australia has been Furiosa: A Mad Max Saga. But then again, that's gonna change. You know that's gonna change. Okay, back to pirates. Up until 1982, no Australian movie had had a wide release in the US. But for this movie, 20th Century Fox wanted to make it the big summer movie of 1982. Well, summer in the Northern Hemisphere. In Australia, that's winter. But summer in America, June, July, August, the big movie for that time. They prepared a multi-million-dollar publicity campaign worldwide. and it was reported that this was the first time a global distribution deal had been signed before shooting had even started. Journalists also said that this movie represented a new style of filmmaking partnership between Australia's producers and the American-based international distributors. The Australian producers thing is important. 20th Century Fox had the publicity and distribution rights to the movie, but they did not produce it. That belonged to Australian company JHI Productions and their investors. JHI for Joseph Hamilton International, so David Joseph and Ted Hamilton. This was their production company. They wanted to make this as Australian a movie as possible, despite not setting it in Australia. They wanted Australian cast and crew. They wanted a greater box office take. They wanted any and all tax breaks that came from that, more on that later. But also, they really believed in this project. The Aussie team believed so strongly in this, in fact, that David Joseph and Ted Hamilton put up $2 million of their own money to fund it. That works out to about $6 million American dollars today. Ted Hamilton told reporters that this movie was a winner with a capital W. He was sure of it. He even predicted it was going to get 3 Oscar nominations, and he knew which ones. Best Song, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Soundtrack, by which I think he meant Best Score. This man had all the faith in the movie that he was both producing and starring in. Maybe he kept all his confidence in that jeweled codpiece. So, by all accounts, people were excited to make this movie, and not just the producers. The cast and crew had a great energy and enthusiasm to them too, and for a while, everything looked good. For a while. Let me be clear, this was not a cursed production. This was not one of those times where everything goes wrong, people get hurt, things like that. But it was not without its hurdles. First, the producers went with a young director named Richard Franklin for this production, and then rehearsals started up, but something happened. Some accounts say that Christy McNichol and Franklin had a massive falling out. Allegedly, Christy McNichol had negotiated having script approval over the production, despite the fact that she was a teenager and also not a supermassive star, and she and Franklin didn't see eye to eye in the direction the story was taking. Other accounts say that the problem was with the powers that be, that they didn't want to spend the money that Franklin wanted to spend to do what he wanted to do with the production, which led to creative differences. Either way, he left. He just abruptly left. So now they didn't have a director. For a while, the production was in limbo. Atkins and McNichol went back to the US, the rest of the cast kept rehearsing, and by all accounts, it sounds like things were pretty frustrating. But eventually, the producers brought in a new director named Ken Anakin, and I wish he was the inspiration for the name Anakin Skywalker, because that would be amazing. But apparently George Lucas's publicist has actually made a statement denying that the two names have anything to do with each other, so whatever, dream ruined. Anyway, Anakin was an older guy who'd had at least 40 movies under his belt by this, so he came into this thing ready to work. But apparently he also had a few clashes with McNichol, mostly around her chewing gum. She chewed gum so much on the set that there's actually an outtake at the end of the movie right before the credits roll, where she's in a suit of armor, and she has to spit her gum out into a crew member's hand. Glad they could laugh about it, I guess, but I swear they do not pay the crew enough on movies.
Someone better take my gum.
There's also another point of conflict around Christy McNichol, but it's hard to tell whether she had anything to do with this one. Allegedly, on set, none of the other actresses, the ones who played her sisters, they weren't allowed to wear makeup. Like, at all. McNichol herself was made up every day by the on-set makeup artists, but the other girls weren't. It wouldn't surprise me if there was some resentment about that. Apparently, according to one of the actresses who worked on the film, she and one of her friends tried to smuggle some eye makeup onto set one day, and when they were seen wearing it, they were scolded and ordered to go wash it off and not come back until it was gone. I don't know where this no makeup rule came from, if it came from the powers that be, if it came from the director, if it came from Christy McNichol's team. I don't know, but it's weird, right? It just seems weird to not put any makeup on the women who were supposed to be the pretty, frilly sisters. Okay, so the production. Production ran from the end of 1981 to early 1982, and it spanned several locations in Australia. The interior library set, which was built specifically for the big fight scene because of all the stunts they'd have to do, even that was built on a Sydney soundstage. The cast rehearsed their hearts out for the singing and dancing numbers, the movie got made, and post-production ramped up. So even with these little hiccups, things were going mostly smoothly. In the editing stage, of course, a lot of footage ended up on the cutting room floor. That's normal. For the scene with the song Pumpin' and Blowin', for example, the original cut of that scene had all the sisters dancing around underwater, but in the final cut, the sisters were all removed and replaced by animated fish. It's a pretty significant shift from the original and also kind of out there even for this movie. But that animation was done by a Melbourne-based animator who also worked on Yellow Submarine, the movie the Beatles did, that was fully animated. So I can't be too mad at it. It's like a dream sequence. And I can even make it fit the narrative. I like to think that they're implying that Frederick is oxygen deprived and is hallucinating all those fish because he doesn't have enough air. I don't know if that's canon, but Mabel's up on the boat constantly forgetting to turn the crank that supplies him with air, so I think it fits. I'm sure there was no lasting brain damage. Anyway, other changes made to the movie in post were a little less well received, especially by the producers. 20th Century Fox apparently cut 20 minutes of runtime from the film, which really upset Ted Hamilton. He said in an interview that the cuts ruined the jokes, so they no longer made sense, and also emasculated the film. He claimed he fought with the studio about the cuts, but he knew he wasn't going to win because he was a first-time Australian movie producer and they were 20th Century Fox. But honestly, some of those changes were definitely for the best.
They took my joke, which was my best joke in the movie, when I said, "Tell me, men, after all these years at sea, what have you missed most?" And they all yell out, "Sex." And there was one black guy in the crew who said watermelon. That was the joke. Sex was easy. Anybody would have said that. But watermelon was the joke.
Yikes. Yeah, that's not at all a good joke. I'm glad they cut that. That was the right call to cut that. There were others too, which I cannot share here, but use your imagination if you want to know how bad it got. Suffice it to say the final film changed from the original version and Hamilton was not happy about that. There was also some financial stress around the film. In June 1981, the Australian government introduced something called Division 10BA, which was basically a massive tax benefit for Australian filmmaking. Investors could claim up to 150% tax concession on their investment and only pay tax on half of the income earned from that investment. The tax concession was gradually reduced to 100%, but still, you could see why that would be really motivating. This sparked a small boom in Australian filmmaking. From 1981 to 1988, 896 films were financed using Division 10BA, including 227 feature films. That accounted for 92% of Australian films made during that time. So as you can imagine, with that kind of tax incentive, a lot of people were getting into filmmaking in Australia, which caused a bit of a bubble. The ramifications of 10BA and the fallout after it are a conversation for another time, but you could see why it lit a fire under these investors and producers. Anyway, the pirate movie went into production at the end of 1981, and Hamilton and Joseph really wanted those sweet tax breaks. To get that Division 10BA status, it had to be a qualifying Australian film, and that came with an official certification. That basically meant that it was produced and financed in Australia. So there was a problem, and as Ted Hamilton tells it in interviews, some jealous Australian producers got the government to revoke this film's certificate of qualifying Australian film, which then jeopardized the tax incentive. Hamilton says that the general manager of the Australian Film Commission at the time, Joe Skrzynski, basically refused to believe that the movie was going to get a general release, or that it was funded by Australians, even though Hamilton showed him the receipts and all the proof. Skrzynski told the minister to pull the certificate because he said the funding was coming from 20th Century Fox, not from Australian investors, which would mean it wasn't a qualifying Australian film. So allegedly, that's what happened. The certificate got pulled. Hamilton was not about to stand for that, so according to him, he took this all the way to the Australian capital of Canberra. He says he went to the Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Fraser, to make the case that this was in fact a qualifying Australian film. He brought the receipts, the proof of the financing, all of that, showed it to the Prime Minister, and according to him, Malcolm Fraser overturned the earlier minister's decision and gave back their certificate.
I went to Canberra with the Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, and I made him, for the first time in the history, I believe, overturn the minister's decision put forward by the Australian producers that this was not an Australian qualifying film.
That's good for the film and for the filmmakers and their tax break, but if any of that played out at all the way Hamilton describes it, you could see why that might cause a little strife in the Australian filmmaking industry. And apparently, it did. Hamilton also claims that a writer for Australian Variety was so upset that he'd gone all the way to the Prime Minister with this, that he deliberately wrote a scathing negative review of the pirate movie to try and poison the well around the publicity. There's no way of knowing whether this is true, but it's an interesting hypothesis because, for whatever reason, the pirate movie was not received well. But man, did it try. Let's start by talking about the publicity for this movie. 20th Century Fox set out on a multi-million-dollar campaign to promote it. They were all in. Reportedly, they issued electronic press kits to promote the film, which included like a cassette tape with clips and information and stuff like that, in addition to the usual paper stuff, and this was one of the first movies that used an electronic press kit for promotions. There were also promotional tie-ins all over the place for this film. In the movie, Mabel gets a scoop of pirate gold ice cream from a Baskin-Robbins cart, so in real life, Baskin-Robbins started offering a pirate gold flavor.
Introducing Pirate Gold. Get your Pirate Gold. We're giving them away free. Ha ha.
Reports say it was a rum-flavored ice cream with bits of butter brickle in it, and they marketed it with bold print and pirate imagery and all that stuff, and honestly, I wish I could try it. It sounds really good. I found a recipe online for rum ice cream and also for butter brickle, so I guess I could just make it from scratch myself. Or you could if you're old enough to buy rum and want to try making something like this. If you do, tell me in the comments how it goes. I'm very curious. Also, a surfwear company called Hang 10 apparently teamed up with the movie and gave away promotional posters and things like that. But most of the promotional tie-ins came from American malls. Ah, the American mall. Still a big thing in the 1980s. Nearly 200 malls across the country signed up to be part of this movie's promotional efforts. The malls hosted pirate-themed events like scavenger hunts, costume contests, coloring contests, anything to get people fired up about pirates. And there were prizes like chocolate coins, movie posters, sometimes just cash. For what it's worth, a $100 cash prize in 1982 would be worth like $327 today. So that's pretty good. Definitely worth putting on an eye patch and hobbling around on a peg leg outside the Auntie Anne's pretzel shop. Christopher Atkins and Christy McNichol, of course, went out on the junket promoting the movie with journalists. That's normal. But Atkins went even further. He hosted a TV show called Swashbucklers about pirate history. McNichol apparently appeared on the show as a guest, and they showed some stuff from the movie, including behind-the-scenes stuff. And Atkins appeared on an Australian show called Countdown. He even hosted that one. And the songs were a big part of the publicity for this movie. The soundtrack was released in August of 1982 on vinyl and cassette. And look what I have here! It's the vinyl! I have this! My vinyl collection is small and extremely weird, but I'm very happy to have this. Look at this magnificent specimen of musical history. Look at that. Anyway, in the US, they put out singles for How Can I Live Without Her, which is like the love ballad that Frederick sings.
How can I live without her? If she's all I'm living for.
And also First Love, which is the duet that Frederick and Mabel sing when they meet.
And I feel first love. You're all I've dreamed of. Love moves me inside like the moon moves the tide. My first love.
How Can I Live Without Her made it to 71 on the Billboard Top 100 chart, but First Love didn't even make it on there. In Australia, the album did a lot better, made it to number 39. How Can I Live Without Her was still the most popular song off the album, even in Australia, hitting 31 on the Australian singles charts, and being chosen for a compilation called Raiders of the Pop Charts? Yeah, that's a real thing. The Peter Couples Band also released a cover of the Happy Ending song, the finale song, in Australia. And the band latched onto that song and just kind of kept performing it for years. More on that in a sec. Back on TV, Atkins went out flexing that singing ability that he'd worked so hard to develop. He performed How Can I Live Without Her on American Bandstand and Solid Gold, and he was all in on it.
check this out. So here's a gold album that I got from Australia. I don't know if you can see it or not. The gold album, How Can I Live Without Her? And that was a challenge because I'm not a singer, but they can, thank God for machines, they can make a dog sing. So it worked out pretty good. And then I was on all of those Dick Clark and Molly Meldrum and all over the world, all those music shows singing that song. So it was quite a trip for me.
As for the other songs on the soundtrack, Happy Ending was played at the end of the Thanksgiving episode of Dancing on Air on ABC that year, and the dancers all just sort of fell into a kick line as the song started. I'm not sure why that happened, but they seem to be having a genuinely great time. And also the cast does do their own kick line at the end of the movie itself, so I guess it's just a kick line sort of song. The Peter Couples Band went on Countdown to perform Happy Ending because, again, remember, this is their song now. Just look at this. I do not even have words. And then Christopher Atkins comes out to sword fight a random pirate directly in the faces of the band members in the middle of a song. And then he also starts a kick line with the band. I can't. So between the music, the mall tie-ins, the ice cream flavor, the promotion for the pirate movie was clearly designed to paint it as a family-friendly romp of a film, despite some pretty raunchy content in the movie itself. Then something happened to throw a wrench into this carefully manufactured clean image. Within a month of this movie coming out, Christopher Atkins appeared on the cover of Playgirl magazine. Playgirl was a magazine like Playboy, except the models in it were nude or mostly nude men. Atkins himself wasn't nude in the photo spread, but he was showing a lot of skin. And given that there was a taboo around male nudity at the time and kind of still persists today, at least compared to female nudity, it wasn't a great look to have that come out right at the same time as the movie. So, after that ambitious publicity blitz for the time, how'd the movie do? Did all that effort actually work? Let me start with a positive. Right now, the audience score for the pirate movie on Rotten Tomatoes is 77% out of more than 10,000 reviews. That's a pretty good score, well into the fresh category that the site uses. So audiences clearly like this film, even today, more than 4 decades after it came out. But the critics have not been so kind, now or when it came out, but you know what, we'll get to that. Performance-wise, I'm sure it's not a big shock that this movie didn't do great. In the US, it opened at number 5, behind juggernauts like E.T. and Officer and a Gentleman, so that's not terrible. But then the following week, the critics' reviews started rolling in. And also that week, Fox, for some reason, released Star Wars on home video, Laserdisc, Betamax, etc. for home viewing. This was a big deal because in 1982, Star Wars was the most pirated movie. It was hard to find in video rental stores, and having it finally be available to own at home was massive. People went and bought VCRs just so they could watch this movie at home. They had over 1 million pre-orders for the video cassettes. But of course, that just created more competition for those precious entertainment hours that people would be spending watching movies. And a lot of people ended up staying home with their VCRs and their Star Wars instead of going to see the singing, silly pirate movie. So that second week, the pirate movie was at number 13 at the box office. And by week 3, it just fell off the list entirely. That was pretty much it, although it did linger in theaters for a while after that. Movies back then didn't get booted from theaters as quickly as they do now, and it's not like it could just move to a streaming service. So how much money did the pirate movie make in those few weeks that anybody saw it? The US box office take was $8 million, so it made back its budget, but not by much. Certainly not as much as I'm sure the producers expected for the big, silly summer musical movie. The Australian box office was barely over $1 million. It was definitely, by all definitions, a flop. Now, that critic situation I said we were going to come back to. So 20th Century Fox made a decision that I think was really, really bad. They decided not to let critics watch this movie before it was released to the public. Usually, critics get pre-screenings so they can write their reviews before the movie actually hits theaters for the general audiences. They might go to a sneak preview or get the movie sent to them at home or maybe even catch it at a film festival. But this time, no critic was allowed to see it early. So they were seeing it at the same time as the general audiences and then writing their reviews from there. It's important to note that the pirate movie's not the only movie that's done this tactic. 2 other movies came out that same weekend that did the same thing. Those were Cheech and Chong's Things Are Tough All Over and an Arthurian type of adventure movie called The Sword and the Sorcerer. But in all cases, it makes critics very wary. A movie critic for Newsday wrote that a lack of preview screenings arouses suspicion that movies are bad, and that's not an unreasonable position. But the pirate movies distributors defended their decision to shut out the critics until the movie's release. An executive vice president of 20th Century Fox named Irv Ivers, which is an amazing name, said that you can look at some movies and just tell that critics are going to destroy them. He said, "If you were in my place, would you show them?" Yeah, Irv, I might. Especially if not showing them means they're going to get mad about it and see the movie through an unfavorable lens. Anyway, Ivers said that movies should open in a neutral environment so audiences can make up their minds before they're influenced by critics. He also thought it made sense for critics to see the movies alongside the audiences, like that was the best way to get an impression about the movie. But when most movies are pre-screened to critics, it really stands out when yours isn't. And that year, most of the lowest grossing movies were also not pre-screened, which, like it or not, influences critics. So the movie came out, critics had to watch it alongside the unwashed masses, and the reviews began to roll in. As our friend Irv Ivers predicted, critics tore up the pirate movie. The headlines were things like, "Pirate movie shipwrecked by bad gags," "Pirate movie walks uneven plank in its plot," and "Clumsy pirate movie deserves to walk the plank." There were a lot of plank walking headlines, actually, like "Pirate movie producer should walk the plank," "Pirate has viewers walk the plank." The plank thing was quite a running theme. Of course, the actual reviews backed up those headlines with some really savage critiques. There seemed to be no part of this movie that critics actually liked. The New York Times critic wrote that the pirate movie, lacking jokes of its own, reaches shamelessly into other movies for a few. The Miami News critic wrote that even Andy Warhol wouldn't throw this much pop junk at a wall and hope to make it stick. The reviewer for the Fort Lauderdale News and Sun-Sentinel went after the cast, saying that McNichols and Atkins sent in their performances by carrier pigeon. Every so often, a reviewer would say that Ted Hamilton could sing or the filmmakers made a good effort, but by and large, not a lot was written about this movie that anyone would want to put in a scrapbook, unless they immediately lit that scrapbook on fire or something. There was also some conflict when the movie came out that might not have been a big deal, but probably could not have helped any of this. The screenwriter, Trevor Ferrant, was apparently so pissed about how this movie turned out. He told reporters that he was a writer of repute, and that, quote, "The final film is a travesty of my script. There are phallic jokes, a scene in front of a McDonald's hamburger shop, and promotion of ice cream. This is not film. This is prostitution." Wow. Okay. Ted Hamilton apparently heard all this and went on the record saying that Ferrant was being ungrateful, that he'd been a nobody before Hamilton found him, and that other screenwriters would kill for a solo credit. So there's that, I guess, but I can't imagine many critics were positively influenced by the screenwriter for a film coming out immediately after it releases and calling it prostitution. More recent reviews haven't been any kinder. In 2005, Real Film Reviews said this legendary box office bomb is just as bad as it's made out to be, if not worse. That's pretty scathing and I think a bit harsh. Here are some of the other critic reviews that popped up on Rotten Tomatoes, although most of the linked reviews no longer exist on their source sites, so I can't confirm them. The pirate movie is sitting at a 9 right now on Rotten Tomatoes for critic reviews. Just 9. On the same site where audiences give it a 77% favorable rating. A 9 from the critics and a 77 from the audience is a pretty insane disparity. In fact, that puts the pirate movie up there with films like Venom, 30% critics and 80% viewers, Super Troopers, 36% critics, 90% viewers, and Shaft, 34% critics and 94% viewers, for films that critics absolutely panned but audiences fell in love with, albeit after the fact sometimes. Those who post comments call the movie a fun romp not to be taken too seriously. Many of them talk about seeing the movie as kids and growing up with it. Yeah. But mostly, they just praise the silliness of it, the campiness of it, the playful joy of it. So do we believe the audiences or do we believe the critics? You believe me. That's who you believe. But I'll try to give it as impartial a shake as I possibly can. The critics were not entirely wrong. On the surface, the pirate movie isn't a good movie. If I had never seen it and watched it for the first time as an adult, I'd probably be mildly entertained, but also confused. I might be a bit uncomfortable because parts of this thing really are cringy. But I didn't watch it for the first time as an adult. I watched it as a kid. A very young kid who loved the silly songs and didn't understand most of the jokes or references. And that's kind of wonderful. For example, there's a scene near the start of the movie where the Pirate King asks the pirates what they've missed for the 20 years they've been at sea. You remember the watermelon joke that got cut. The pirates all say sex at the same time. When I was little, I didn't know the word sex. I definitely didn't know what it meant, so I thought all the pirates were saying six. Like they were correcting the Pirate King on his math. It hadn't been 20 years at sea, it had been 6. That was my tiny little innocent brain at work, and it wasn't until I watched it years later that I finally figured out they were actually saying sex. And even then, it took me a while to believe it because that 6 was very ingrained in my brain at that point. That was part of the magic of the pirate movie. Watching it from a young age, I grew up with it. Every time I watched it, I understood a little more. And then a little more. There were some references that I never completely got until I was an adult. Mostly the references to the Pirates of Penzance or the pop culture of the early 80s, but even then I could figure out a joke was being made. I could tell there was a punchline happening. Because this thing is high camp and nuance does not exist. It's over-the-top, silly fun. It's song after song interspersed with strange animation, bad dancing, and surprisingly positive queer coding. Honestly, it might have done better if it was made just a few years ago, like a manic pixie dream pirate film. So what happened? Did the pirate movie launch anyone's career? Definitely not. Nobody rocketed to stardom on the back of this film. But this failed summer blockbuster that was roundly panned and probably should have fallen into obscurity had a few things going for it. One was HBO. HBO was the premium cable channel in the 80s when cable was just getting going. All it aired was movies, one right after another, ranging from the family-friendly to the definitely not appropriate for children. And apparently, HBO aired this movie in the 80s so often that it was almost impossible to turn on your TV and not see the pirate movie. That's how my parents got it. They taped it off of HBO, and then put it on the VHS shelf for me to find years later. So a lot of people just watching their TVs happened to cross paths with the pirate movie and got familiar with it whether they wanted to or not. Another factor that helped the pirate movie was that high camp. In the end, it doesn't matter what critics say or don't say about a film. If audiences like it, they just like it. It doesn't have to make sense, and it doesn't have to be good from a filmmaking perspective. This movie had catchy music and great locations. It had amazing costumes and lots of enthusiasm. It was so cringe that it actually looped back around to being charming, and for that, the following grew. It was hard to hate something so earnestly childish. And also childlike, honestly. Even when Christy McNichol would get a little tongue-in-cheek with her line reads, there would be Ted Hamilton, ready to be the most authentic, genuine, musically inclined pirate king to ever sail the seven seas. Not being able to take it seriously means not being able to hate it seriously. So let me be clear, I do not necessarily recommend that you watch this movie. It's very likely you'll regret some of the time you spend on it if you go that route. But I also can't say that it's not worth the watch. There's a lot happening in this film, and some of it was pretty momentous for its time. The producers put their hearts, souls, and bank accounts into it, and they never lost faith that it would be an amazing movie. I respect the effort, even if the result is kind of all over the place. Plus, this movie was quite literally my childhood. It influenced my personality, probably in more ways than are appropriate, and it's required viewing for anyone I date. If he doesn't like the pirate movie, or at least see the potential in it, I'm probably not going to like him. It's not the only measure for relationship success, but it's up there, like being a non-smoker. So there you have it, the story of the pirate movie. How it was made, how it turned out, and how it's hanging on now, more than 40 years later, as something that makes people laugh and go, yeah, I remember that one, that was weird. And then they sing Give Me a Happy Ending, they form a kick line, and they live happily ever after.
Give me a happy ending every time. We'll kiss and make up. That's a very peaceful sign. Give me a happy ending every
I have these gold coins, but this one's chocolate. Should I eat it? Do you think I should eat it? No, I think it's old. I think this is old chocolate. Never mind. You know what? Pirate gold.
All right, take care. Frederick out.